I've never felt worse after writing a poem. Somewhere in the verse, I find myself at home, and whatever's on my mind cascades to the side as I take myself on a ride and rhyme. With no concept of time, I'm lulled into peace like a babe in the back seat, or I get a runner's high like I just came from a track meet. Rumor on the street is when we speak in a beat, our brain gets a treat, and from there we can defeat stress and scattered thinking. I feel my English teacher winking, but I will use the page to find a home because I have never felt worse after writing a poem. So today I want to share about how we as human beings are actually neurologically wired to write poetry. Now, obviously, I'm a little biased. I am a spoken word poet, but I have been just amazed by how poetry has impacted my life in ways I wouldn't have expected. And then when I did some research and I realized, like, actually, that's not just in my head, that's scientific, I just realized I had to share it. My name is Trisha Veldman. I am a confidence coach and spoken word poet and founder of the platform Powerful and Poised. You can find out more about me at powerfulandpoised.com. You can also check out my poetry book, Create and Receive, Make and Believe, Finding Peace Through Primarily Positive Poetry. So I stumbled on poetry after walking into an event where people were performing spoken word, and the whole way home I was like, oh my gosh, I'm writing this. Now, of course, back in the day when I was in school, I always loved poems, but I never actually pursued it or did much with it in my adult life. And then this poetry writing has gotten me through a very stressful, difficult time in my life. If you follow this channel, you know what that is all about. If not, go watch some of those videos. But the point is, I feel not only an emotional calm, but a physical calm and sense of security, sense of emotional processing when I am writing, reading, and performing poetry. So I wanted to make a quick video about some of the scientific proven benefits of poetry on the brain and body. And I'll share some tips about how to use this to actually improve your own confidence with your personal self-expression. Because I will say, performing poetry has completely shifted the way I show up in the world in the best way that I never would have predicted or expected. So I'm going to read a quote from a study I found. A recent study has shown that the brain displays a positive electrophysiological response when presented with sentences that conform to certain poetic construction rules. It is the first demonstration of unconscious processing of poetic constructs by the brain, which means your brain recognizes poetic structure before it consciously processes what is being said. Now, this makes a lot of sense because as babies, we learn language through rhythm. Every language has a rhythm. You can kind of tell what language is being spoken just based on the cadence and the rhythm and the way the patterns people are using, as opposed to understanding the words themselves. Another study says, like music and art, poetry engages areas of the brain associated with pleasure and reward. Studies show that the repeated patterns and rhyme in poetry produce positive emotional responses, including a pre-chill, as anticipation is built up through the poem's rhythm, and it can elicit peak emotional experiences, including chills and goosebumps. Now, isn't that amazing? I mean, it makes sense. But it is very cool to know that when you're listening to or reading or writing poetry, not only are you processing words at an intellectual level, but your whole body is actually involved. Very similar to listening to a song. That's a poem put to music. And obviously music has a big effect on our body and the way that we feel. So knowing that poetry can help us elicit feel-good emotions means, for me, I need to make it an even bigger priority because I like to feel good. But what I also want to share is that poetry is something everybody is wired for. And that's the part I found really fascinating. I mean, obviously we enjoy listening to it. A lot of people do. There's a reason children's books always rhyme, because that pattern keeps them hooked. That's the reason we remember rhymes from our childhood, because the rhythm and the pattern, it's easy to remember. Often there's an emotional component that sticks in our brain. But did you know that your human brain is actually wired to also produce poetry, not just enjoy it when you take it in? I won't go into the deep science because I don't fully grasp it, but I did read several articles that talked about how different areas of the brain are at work when we're writing poetry, and everyone has those areas in the brain. And when you think about this as being something very natural and intrinsic to the human mind, it makes sense. Because think about the Bible, Psalms, Proverbs. There are a lot of poetic expressions there. And think about rap, which is often born on the streets. That's poetry. So sometimes people think of poetry and they think like highfalutin university scholars writing these deep poems that are difficult to understand. But a lot of poetry, like rap, for example, is started on the street. And it doesn't matter your education level, you can write a rhyme. Children do it probably more easily than a lot of adults do. And so I personally don't really identify with that very scholarly style of poetry. If you've heard my poetry, if you read my poems, I'm often compared to Dr. Seuss. Not that I'm writing children's books, although I have written some children's books and I love that, but I like using adult language and more mature intellectual concepts, but with a rhyme scheme that isn't necessarily appreciated or acknowledged in that other class of poetry. But the beautiful thing about poetry is that anything counts. I actually did a poem about this where I'm like, I'll link it here, but there are no rules in poetry. And it's so funny to me, sometimes people will ask me like, or they'll say like, oh, but I haven't studied iambic pentameter, or I don't know the rules of poetry, I can't write that. And I'm like, me neither. Maybe I studied that like in high school, but I never took poetry in college. I don't know the rules now. And that's how I know this to be true, that this is wired in our brains, because I have always loved to write, but I don't remember the rules about poetry. In fact, I don't follow the rules. One, because I don't know them, but two, because that's not fun. It's real for me. Some people love it, and some people really appreciate the structure. And I do love writing a good haiku every now and then because I remember the rules for that. But my point is, you don't have to be trained in the discipline of writing poetry to practice it. Anyone can do it. Anyone can write a song. Now, the musicality may not come as naturally to you. It doesn't for me. Every once in a while, I'll think of like a melody, and that would be cool. But I'm certainly don't consider myself a naturally talented musician by any stretch. But I'm a lyricist, and you can be a lyricist too if you want to. Not saying you have to, but I do encourage you, whether you consider yourself a writer or not, or whether you've ever written a poem or not, to explore poetry in some form. I'm going to walk you through some exercises at the end, but also, even if you don't want to write poetry, reading it or listening to it can open up different pathways of your brain to inspire your creative thinking. One of the studies I read was talking about all the cognitive benefits of poetry, and it was like, oh, I'm getting a good mental workout by doing this. And personally, what I have noticed when I am reciting a poem, so when I'm practicing for an open mic, for example, I don't like to read my poems because it throws me off. I always get tongue-tied when I'm reading, but I prefer to memorize them and perform them. I have realized that part of why this has been such a salve for me in an emotionally turbulent time is because when I am practicing the recitation of poetry, meaning I have it memorized and I'm recalling it from memory, I have to be 100% present. It is an entire it is a very powerful mindfulness exercise because the second my mind drifts away, I'm going to lose my spot. Now, I will say I often recite and practice while I'm cooking or while I'm driving or while I'm doing something else. So it doesn't mean that I have to be like just sitting there reciting the poem. I can be doing something physical and still recite it, but mentally, I have to be so mindful because if my mind starts drifting to something else, I'm going to forget my word. Just like when I'm performing an open mic, if I get distracted by someone in the audience, I might forget my lines. That's been known to happen. But the act of repeating it over and over and over again is such a healthy mindfulness practice that I've found. And I'm not going to find that in a mindfulness book. I'm like, well, actually, I suppose that's why mantras and affirmations are often recommended because when you're repeating a mantra, especially a mantra that rhymes, you're repeating it over and over. You're not thinking about other things. So a tip, if you want to improve your memory, reduce your stress, improve your mindfulness, memorize something and practice reciting it. I personally find it much easier to memorize things that I have written personally. So presentation speech coach tip, because my clients have been asking me a lot, if you have AI write your presentation, your choice, but just know it's going to be a lot harder to remember that material than if you wrote it yourself. So think about if you were trying to memorize a speech that someone else wrote versus give a speech that you wrote, it's probably a lot easier to remember the speech that you wrote because you had to connect those dots. So that's slightly tangential, but as an exercise, practice writing something and then memorizing it and then saying it. Even if you never do it in front of anyone, it's a really good exercise. And my memory has improved so much since I started doing this on a regular basis. Now, to the point of connecting the dots, one of the things I love about writing poetry and why I wish everyone in the world would do this is because every time I come up with a good line or a rhyme that just fits, especially when I'm not expecting it, I feel like I get a dopamine hit. It's like solving a puzzle. And when we solve puzzles, we do get a dopamine hit. I one time bought a crossword puzzle and I was like, I'm going to do crosswords so I don't go on Instagram as much. And it was very helpful because you get dopamine hits every time you solve the puzzle. So if anyone remembers Taylor Swift's Grammy acceptance speech for Album of the Year, she was giving a speech and she said winning that award was just as exciting to her as writing the bridge to a song or coming up with a good line. And I totally believe her because the elation that comes with, boom, oh, that clicked, that's good. That is a full body experience and it feels so good. And so I 100% agree that that level of excitement is probably on par with winning a Grammy because you're just so excited in the moment. You're 100% present in that moment too. So I think that everyone should try writing poetry for a number of reasons. One, it's good for your brain. It's a really healthy intellectual exercise and creative exercise. Creativity is a balm for so many things. It saves us from so many things. Turn your worries into creative forces. Your worries are creative energy. So use that creative energy for good. And you can write a poem, even if you feel like you're not poetic. Remember, it doesn't have to rhyme. Poems tend to have a rhythm, even if they don't rhyme. So don't worry about not being able to come up with a good rhyme. That doesn't matter. So what I encourage you to do is try writing poetry. You can also just take it in more and see how you feel. Now, I have a confession, which is that I don't read a lot of poetry, but I do love it when I do. And I remember asking my mom for a poetry book like maybe 7 or 8 years ago before I even started writing poetry because I had seen a few quotes from this poet and I was like, I want his whole book. And then I got his book and I hardly ever read it. But when I do, I feel so good. I don't really read a lot of poetry because I don't want it to influence my own, but it's often recommended for any sort of creative person to read poetry because it's quick, it's easy. It's not like reading a novel. Just read a few poems and you'll get your creative juices flowing. You can also listen to poetry, like mine. So I have a whole spoken word playlist on my channel, and YouTube has a ton of spoken word artists. And there's something about spoken word that's just like feels good to listen to, especially if the person has a nice voice or has a good command of what they're saying. It's very pleasant. And that's not just my subjective opinion. That is what the science and the research says, that it releases feel good hormones, neurotransmitters. It induces pleasure in the body and mind. So go listen to poetry. Now, I really do think that writing poetry can be a powerful way to help you improve your confidence with your personal and self-expression. So if you're feeling stuck and you're like, that sounds great in theory, but how do I write a poem? Here is a simple exercise I did with a group the other day. I was actually speaking to a Parkinson's support group about some speech and voice things, but I was introduced to the group because I met a man when I was performing poetry, and he was like, oh my gosh, I used to write poems after I got Parkinson's and I didn't know how to process my feelings, and I never written poems before, and I tried it once and it was very helpful. So can you come do some poetry? And so at the end of the workshop, I had everyone write their own poem. Since I've never had instruction on how to write poetry, I was very nervous about teaching a class about it because I'm like, I don't know how to teach someone how to write poetry because it comes naturally, not just to me, it comes naturally to you too. So trust yourself that you can do it, but I'm going to give you a prompt because I do find that prompts help. And I borrowed this strategy from my friend who teaches writing workshops where I live. And so very simple. You're going to use lists to inspire you. For this one, here's the prompt I'm going to give you. This is the prompt I gave to the Parkinson's group. Take 1 minute. Write a list of things you loved to do as a child. Pause the video. 60 seconds. Write your list. Then you're going to write a list of things that make you feel alive. Pause the video. Take 1 minute. Write your list. And you can use other lists too. So maybe you want to write a list of things you lose easily, or things you're looking forward to, or friends you have, or flowers you adore, or smells you like, or foods that make your lips pucker, or whatever you want. My friend Britt is really good at coming up with these categories, but this is a common thing in writers groups to use lists as prompts. So come up with a list, but for our little workshop here, go to your list of things you love to do as a child, circle 1. Then go to lists of things that make you feel alive, circle 1. Don't overthink it, just pick whatever feels right. Hopefully, ideally, there'll be 2 different words. And then take 3 minutes, set a timer, and write a poem. Or just free writing. It doesn't have to be a poem, but just write about whatever comes to mind inspired by those 2 words. When you're feeling stuck creatively, or you're just in a funk in general, or you can't get your mind to stop spiraling, make a list, write a poem, read a poem, listen to a poem. But get your mind in that poetic state because it will help get you out of a funk. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. No one, well, I can't say no one because I don't know, but I know, like I said in the beginning, I have never felt worse after writing a poem. And I feel so passionate about this right now because after my mom passed away, I kind of got out of poetry writing, and one of my mentors was like, so much beautiful poetry is going to come from this. And I did write a few, maybe like 2 or 3 good poems from my really sad grieving state, but I kind of was like numb and not in the mood to write poetry. I'm more of like a happy poetry writer than a sad one. Or like I'll be stressed and write a poem, but I'm not like, when I'm in the throes of grief, I'm not writing as much. Even though I know for a lot of people it's totally opposite. I've met people who are like, I can't write poems when I'm happy. Like I only write poems about being depressed. So everyone's different. But all of that, my point of that, sharing that is to say, in the last maybe week and a half, I've started writing poems again, and I'm just in so much better of a mood, and I feel like I'm processing things so much better, and I'm expressing myself more clearly. And so if you want to improve your confidence expressing yourself, try it in a way that maybe you haven't before. And I cannot tell you how many people I've met when they find out I write poetry and they're like, oh, I used to love writing poetry, but I haven't done it since middle school. The majority of people who tell me that, by the way, are middle-aged men who just say they love poetry, but they got out of it because it's not glorified for adult men to be writing poetry, and that's sad. So whether you're a man or a woman or whatever, and if you've written poetry in the past or you've never written poetry ever, that's your homework. I think I've made the point. If you do like poetry, or if you want more speech and confidence tips, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet, and share this with someone who maybe is in a funk and wants a fun, creative, cathartic way to feel better. Thanks so much for watching.